Have you ever wondered how a woman, cast away by her own family as a burden, could become the most precious treasure in another man's life? In the rugged winds of the American frontier, Evelyn Carter, a young widow who had lost everything, was sent away as a punishment. Her family believed they were ridding themselves of shame. But out there, among wild plains and endless skies, she would meet Caleb Dawson, a man who had long forgotten what love felt like. If it were you, could you open your heart to someone marked by loss and pain? Could you still believe that sometimes God's greatest blessings arrive in the shape of heartbreak? This is not just a story about love. It's about grace, redemption, and the quiet strength of two wounded souls finding light in each other. A woman sent away in disgrace, a man who thought his heart was beyond saving, and together they built something the world no longer believed in, a love that heals, that endures, that feels like home. Are you ready to walk that journey through the dust, the storms, and into the warmth of love reborn? Then join Frontier Hearts, where every story reminds us that even in the wildest lands, tenderness can take root and love always finds its way. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel to begin this unforgettable story. The afternoon light was thin and gray when Evelyn Carter realized her place at the table no longer belonged to her. The Callahans had eaten in silence, spoons striking the bowls like hammer blows. At the far end, her father-in-law finally spoke. "You have brought nothing but sorrow to this house, Evelyn." His voice was cracked like old timber. The others, his wife, two daughters, sat still, eyes lowered. Outside, the wind pressed against the window panes, carrying the sound of loose shutters clapping in the cold. Evelyn didn't answer. She had run out of defenses months ago. Her husband, William, had fallen at Shiloh 2 years before, and somehow grief had turned to accusation. They said she had cursed him with her frail prayers, that her quiet ways had drawn death closer. They said widows carried misfortune like dust on their hems. "You will go west," the old man continued. "There's a rancher there, a friend of a friend. He needs a wife, and you need to stop haunting this house." His words were deliberate, each one a nail sealing her fate. "Mrs." Callahan folded a letter and slid it across the table, a mail order arrangement already made. Evelyn read the name, Caleb Dawson, Willow Creek Ranch, Montana Territory. She traced the ink with her fingertip, numb. She had never heard of the man, but that didn't matter. What mattered was that the family had decided she should vanish, and she was too tired to fight. That night, she packed her trunk by lamplight, a single black dress, a worn Bible, the silver locket William had given her before he left for war. At the bottom, she placed a small journal, the one she had kept during his absence. The last line read, "If the road grows dark, walk toward the faintest light." Her hands trembled as she closed the lid. The latch clicked, sounding final. From the hall came whispers, one sister saying, "It's for the best." Another replying, "Maybe now the house will be quiet again." Evelyn smiled sadly. They spoke as if she were a ghost who had lingered too long. She blew out the lamp, and for the first time since the funeral, the silence did not frighten her. It felt like release. The morning train shrieked through the valley, black smoke trailing against the winter sky. She stood on the platform with a small carpet bag and the ticket they had bought for her, one way to Montana Territory. Snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes, clinging to her veil. The conductor shouted, "Boarding westbound." No one came to see her off. Evelyn climbed the steps, clutching the rail as the engine roared. When the wheels jolted forward, the town blurred into gray distance. She pressed a hand against the window, half expecting regret to rise up in her chest. Instead, there was only a strange calm, like the stillness before a storm that might wash everything clean. Hours turned to days. The train rattled across frozen plains, through towns that smelled of coal and coffee. Inside the passenger car, soldiers slept sitting up, merchants murmured over cards, mothers hushed their children. Evelyn sat alone, wrapped in a shawl, counting the miles that separated her from the life she'd lost. At night, when the lamps swayed, she opened her journal again. She wrote of the whistle's cry, of the prairie stretching endless and empty. She wrote not of fear, but of possibility, though she didn't yet believe the word. Once, a woman across the aisle offered her an apple and asked, "Heading west to family?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, the family sent me west." The woman laughed softly, not understanding. Evelyn didn't explain. On the third evening, the train stopped at a small station called Silver Pass. The snow had thickened. Men shoveled it from the tracks with dull shovels. Evelyn stepped out to stretch her legs, her breath forming white ghosts in the air. A telegraph office blinked with light. She thought of sending a message back, something short, polite. Then she realized there was no one who would read it. She turned instead to the horizon. The mountains rose dark against the sinking sun, sharp and beautiful, like the edge of something new. Somewhere beyond those ridges waited a man named Caleb Dawson, and a ranch she could not picture. Was he old, cruel kind? She didn't know, but she whispered a prayer anyway that whoever he was, he would at least speak to her as a person, not as a curse. That night, as the train thundered onward, Evelyn dreamed. In the dream, she was walking through tall grass under a copper sky. Someone called her name, not William, not any voice she knew. She turned, but saw only light. When she woke, her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't felt fall. She looked out the window. Dawn was breaking over a field of frost, the color of pewter. The horizon glowed faintly pink, and she thought, maybe that's what the journal meant, walk toward the faintest light. For the first time, she allowed herself a breath that wasn't full of sorrow. It tasted of cold air and distant pine. When the train slowed near a wooden sign reading Willow Bend Station, her heart stilled. A man stood on the platform broad-shouldered, coat dusted with snow, hat pulled low. He looked like someone accustomed to waiting. Evelyn gathered her bag and stepped down, boots crunching against the packed ice. The man tipped his hat politely. "Ma'am, you must be Mrs. Carter." His voice was rough, but not unkind. She hesitated. "Yes, and you are Mr. Dawson." He nodded once. "Caleb'll do." Behind him, a wagon waited, steam rising from the horses. He reached for her trunk without another word. The simple courtesy unsettled her more than cruelty would have. As he lifted the trunk, she caught the scent of pine smoke and horse leather clean, real, alive. For a brief instant, standing there in the snow, Evelyn felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not fear, not sorrow, something quieter, like the first flicker of warmth in a long-abandoned hearth. The wagon jolted forward as Caleb clucked softly to the horses. The sound of the wheels creaking over the frozen road filled the quiet between them. A gray dusk hung over the hills, and the trees bowed under heavy snow. Evelyn sat stiffly on the wooden seat beside him, clutching her gloves. The air smelled of pine and cold iron. Every time the wagon hit a rut, her shoulder brushed his coat sleeve, and she would pull away again, uncertain. Caleb spoke first. "It's a good hour to the ranch. The road's rough, but the horses know it." She nodded. "I'm used to rough roads. Mr. Dawson?" He gave a small glance her way, the corner of his mouth twitching almost into a smile. "Then you'll fit right in." They rode in silence after that. In the distance, the last light of day slid down the mountains, spilling gold over the snow like a prayer whispered too late. The sound of the horses' breathing was steady and calm, the rhythm of men who had known hardship and simply kept moving. Evelyn studied the horizon and thought of all she'd left behind. Not much, she realized. A house full of quiet anger, a name that had grown heavy. Here, at least. The air was new. She tried to let it fill her lungs as if she could breathe herself into a different life. Caleb's voice broke the silence. "They told me you were coming. Didn't say much else." Evelyn turned to him. "What did they tell you exactly? That you were alone? That you might need a place?" He hesitated, then added, "Didn't say about the rest." "The rest," she repeated softly, her breath visible in the cold air. "That's a long story." "I've got time," he said. "The horses don't hurry." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe another day, when I've earned the telling." He nodded, and they said no more. The road narrowed through a stand of cottonwoods, their bare branches twisting like bones against the pale sky. A creek ran half-frozen beside them, its surface shining silver under the moon. Somewhere far off, a wolf called, low and mournful. When they finally crested the ridge, Caleb slowed the team and pointed with his gloved hand. "There it is." Below lay a stretch of land tucked between rolling hills, marked by a single row of fences and the soft glow of lamplight from a distant cabin window. The ranch looked small against the wilderness, fragile but stubbornly alive. "It's quieter than I expected," Evelyn said. Caleb's eyes swept the land. "That's why I stay." The words were simple, but she heard what lived beneath them, something between loss and peace. The horses descended the last hill, hooves crunching through ice. As they neared the cabin, a dog barked once, then ran to greet them, tail wagging. Caleb climbed down first, offered his hand, and for a moment, Evelyn hesitated. Then she placed her gloved fingers into his. His hand was warm and calloused. The smallest gesture, yet it steadied her. "Welcome to Willow Creek Ranch," he said quietly. "Inside." The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee. A small fire burned low in the hearth, and the furniture was plain but carefully kept. Evelyn removed her gloves and rubbed her hands near the fire, feeling the sting of returning warmth. Caleb poured her a cup of coffee without asking. "It's not much," he said, "but it's hot." She accepted it with both hands. "It's perfect." He watched her for a moment before speaking again. "You can stay here in the spare room. We'll figure the rest out after you've settled." "The rest?" she asked. "You came here under an agreement, I suppose, but I'm not the marrying kind. Haven't been for a long time. I don't need a wife." Evelyn's eyes lifted. "Then what do you need? Mr. Dawson." He hesitated. "Someone to help. Cook. Keep the place running. Someone who won't spook easy." She met his gaze steadily. "I can do that." He looked away first. "Then we'll try it a few months. If it doesn't work, you can head to town. There's a boarding house near the church." Evelyn nodded, a strange relief loosening the knot in her chest. She hadn't come here to beg for belonging. Work she understood, work she could do. When she retired to the small spare room, she unpacked her few belongings the Bible, the locket, the journal. She placed the journal on the windowsill, where the moonlight fell across its worn cover. Through the frosted glass, she could see the faint outline of the mountains. She whispered softly, "Let this be enough." The following morning, dawn spilled through the window, pale and cold. Evelyn rose early, long before Caleb came in from feeding the stock. She found the kitchen worn but tidy. Every pan hung neatly in its place. By habit, she began preparing breakfast cornbread, beans, and coffee strong enough to wake a ghost. When Caleb entered, snow still dusted on his coat. He paused at the side of the table. "I didn't ask you to cook," he said. "I didn't ask permission," she replied, not looking up. He gave a small, reluctant grin and sat down. They ate in silence, but it was a different kind of silence now, not sharp, not strained, just the kind that fills the air when two people are learning to share it. Afterward, he rose and pulled on his gloves. "If you've the strength for it, there's a shed needs mending." Evelyn wiped her hands. "Show me where." "Outside." The morning had turned bright. The sky stretched endless and blue, and the snow glittered like glass. The wind carried the scent of pine sap and the faint promise of spring. Caleb handed her a hammer and a handful of nails. "You ever fixed a fence before? No, but I'm a fast learner." He chuckled under his breath. "We'll see." They worked side by side, the rhythm of hammering filling the quiet land. Occasionally, he'd glance over, watching how she braced herself, how she refused to quit even when her arms trembled. "At noon," he said, "you can stop there." Evelyn straightened, cheeks flushed from the cold. "Not until it's even." He nodded once, approving but silent. That evening, when the chores were done, they sat again by the fire. Caleb sharpened a knife while Evelyn mended a tear in her shawl. Outside, the wind howled softly, and the dog dozed by the hearth. Caleb said, "You work hard for someone who didn't ask to be here." Evelyn looked into the firelight. "I wasn't asked to be anywhere. That gives me freedom." He thought about that for a long time. Freedom. It wasn't a word he used often, but something in her tone made it sound holy. The fire popped. The light flickered against the rough-hewn walls. "You'll sleep better here," he said at last. "It's quiet country. Nothing bothers you long if you let it pass." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I hope that's true." When he rose to bank the fire for the night, she caught a glimpse of a photograph on the mantel, an older woman with kind eyes, standing beside a younger Caleb in a soldier's uniform. "Your mother?" she asked. He nodded, "Buried near the creek." Evelyn lowered her voice. "I'm sorry." He shook his head. "We all bury someone. Mrs. Carter. That's just life out here." After he left, she sat a while longer, staring into the embers. The words stayed with her. We all bury someone. She thought of William's grave back east, of how she'd never been allowed to mourn him without shame. Maybe here, among strangers, she could at least be honest about her grief. She closed her eyes, listening to the whisper of wind around the cabin walls. The loneliness she'd carried for years didn't feel quite as heavy tonight. It was still there, but it no longer owned her. For the first time in a long while, Evelyn Carter slept without dreaming of the past. The morning sun came pale and uncertain, slipping through the thin clouds that still carried the scent of snow. Evelyn stood outside the cabin, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, watching mist rise from the valley below. It was a quiet she hadn't known in years, quiet that didn't weigh heavy but settled gentle on her shoulders. Caleb stepped out of the barn, carrying a saddle over one arm. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow, revealing forearms marked by sun and work. He nodded to her. "You're up early again." She smiled faintly. "The hens started before I did." "They do that," he said, setting the saddle down on the porch rail. "They think the world spins because of their clucking." Evelyn laughed softly, the sound surprising even her. Caleb looked up, almost startled. It had been a long time since laughter felt at home on the ranch. He cleared his throat. "You'll want to see the north field later. Snow's melting fast. Might be time to plant feed soon." She nodded. "I'd like that. I've never planted anything that lived longer than a few weeks, but maybe the soil here's kinder." Caleb looked out toward the hills. "The land's like people. Mrs. Carter. It remembers how you treat it." He left with the saddle before she could reply, his boots crunching on the thawing ground. Evelyn stayed by the porch rail a moment longer, sipping her coffee, somewhere behind the barn. The ranch dog barked once and went quiet again. The day was beginning, and with it came the comfort of work. She cleaned the kitchen, kneaded dough for bread, and hung laundry near the stove to dry. The air filled with the smell of yeast and soap, simple scents that made the cabin feel alive. She caught herself humming a tune from her girlhood that she thought she had forgotten. When she stepped outside later, she saw a young boy struggling with a bucket near the well. The handle slipped, and the water splashed over his boots. "You must be Luke," she called. He turned, face red. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. Dawson said you might need help with chores." She smiled kindly. "Then you've already helped. I was about to fetch water myself." Luke grinned sheepishly and offered her the bucket. Together they carried it back, the boy's chatter filling the air. He spoke of the horses, the winter storms, and how Mr. Dawson had saved him from sleeping on the street 2 years ago. "Mr. Dawson don't talk much," Luke said, "but he listens. That's better than talking sometimes." Evelyn nodded. "Yes, it is. By noon." The snow began to melt in earnest. Water ran down the paths in narrow ribbons, glinting under the sun. Evelyn helped Luke feed the chickens, then joined Caleb by the fence line. He was repairing a gate post, sleeves rolled again, face set in concentration. "Need a hand?" she asked. He looked up. "You're determined to do a man's work." "I'm determined to do my share," she said simply. He passed her a hammer. "Then hold the beam steady." The post leaned stubbornly, and her hands ached from the weight. But she didn't complain. Caleb worked quickly, his movements sure and practiced. When he was done, he stepped back, studying the work. "Straight enough," he said. Evelyn smiled, brushing dirt from her gloves. "You doubt me, Mr. Dawson." He met her eyes for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them. Acknowledgement? Quiet respect? I reckon not. They stood side by side, watching the horses graze in the distance. The sky had cleared to a soft, endless blue. Evelyn spoke after a while. "Do you ever tire of it? Tire of what this life, the quiet, the distance, the way it never ends, just begins again, each day?" Caleb thought about it, sometimes, but it's honest work. Out here, what you build stays built if you care for it. People can't say that about much. His words lingered. She turned them over in her mind, long after they'd gone back to their separate tasks. That evening, the wind came up from the west, carrying the smell of rain. They ate supper in companionable silence, beans, bread, a small piece of smoked pork. Luke spoke most, telling them about a hawk that had snatched one of the hens earlier. After the meal, Evelyn gathered the dishes. Caleb stood at the door, watching the dark clouds gather over the hills. "Storm coming," he said. "You'll hear it on the roof before midnight. Should we bring in the horses? They're safe in the barn. It's us who'll lose sleep." The first drops came as he spoke, soft at first, then harder, drumming on the roof. The fire popped in the hearth, casting gold light across the walls. Evelyn sat near it, sewing by the glow. Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to her. "For the noise," he said. "Thank you." She took it, the warmth seeping into her palms. The rain deepened into a steady roar. Lightning flickered beyond the window, white against the black sky. Caleb sat in the chair across from her, hat tilted back, eyes half closed. For a long time, neither spoke. Then he said, almost to himself, "You're not like most who come west." She glanced up. "How so they come running from something, and they never stop looking over their shoulder? You look like you're still listening for what's ahead." Evelyn lowered her needle, surprised. "Maybe I am. I've had enough of ghosts, Mr. Dawson." He nodded slowly. "Me too." Thunder rolled over the hills, long and low. The sound seemed to draw them closer, as if the storm had made the cabin smaller, more private. Evelyn sipped her coffee and asked quietly, "Was it war that brought you here?" Caleb stared into the flames. "War. And what came after? I lost folks. A woman, too. I figured if I kept my hands busy, maybe the noise would fade." "Has it?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not yet." The firelight softened his features, turning the lines of weariness into something almost tender. Evelyn wanted to say something comforting, but words felt clumsy beside grief that deep. Instead, she reached for another log and placed it on the fire. The gesture was small, but he noticed. He gave her a look, half thanks, half wonder. "Storm will pass by morning," he said. "They always do," she replied softly. When the thunder finally drifted east, the room was filled only with the soft crackle of the fire. Luke had fallen asleep near the hearth, his boots kicked off. The dog curled at his side. Caleb rose and covered the boy with a blanket. Then he looked toward Evelyn. "You should rest too?" She nodded. "Good night, Mr. Dawson. Good night, Mrs. Carter, in her room." Evelyn stood for a while by the small window, watching the rain slow into mist. Beyond the glass, the land shimmered faintly under the moon's return. She thought of his words, how he spoke of the noise that wouldn't fade. She knew that sound. She carried her own version of it. Maybe that was what made the silence here so bearable. 2 souls who had learned to live beside the echo of things they'd lost. When she lay down, the sheets cool against her skin, she whispered into the dark, "Let tomorrow be gentle," and somewhere beyond the walls. She thought she heard Caleb's footsteps pause, as if he, too, was listening for the same mercy. By late March, the snow had all but melted from the valley floor. The earth softened under the horses' hooves, and the air smelled faintly of grass instead of smoke. Every morning, mist rose off the creek like breath, and when the sun broke through, the whole world seemed rinsed clean. Evelyn stood outside the cabin with her sleeves rolled, wringing out freshly washed linens. Water dripped from her hands, cool and clear. Behind her, the steady rhythm of Caleb's hammering came from the barn, each strike echoing down the open field. The sound no longer startled her. It had become part of her mornings, the same as the call of the meadowlark or the creak of the windmill turning above the well. Inside the cabin, Luke clattered dishes and sang off-key. The boy's energy seemed endless now that winter had loosened its grip. Evelyn smiled faintly, listening as he tried to remember the words to a hymn. His voice cracked halfway through the verse, and he gave up with a laugh. She hung the last sheet, the white fabric snapping in the breeze, and looked toward the barn. Caleb stepped out, brushing sawdust from his shirt, and spotted her. "You keepin' the place cleaner than it's ever been," he said. "Someone has to," she answered lightly. "Besides, I like seeing the sun come through the windows again." Caleb nodded, glancing at the sky. "Looks like it'll hold. Might ride out to the east pasture after dinner. Fences there took a beating in the thaw." Evelyn wiped her hands on her apron. "Do you want help?" He hesitated, the automatic refusal rising to his lips. Then he stopped himself. "Sure. You ride." "It's been a while," she admitted. "But I can still sit a saddle. Then we'll see after we eat." When noon came, they ate stew and fresh bread on the porch, the breeze gentle and warm. Caleb rarely said much during meals, but there was an ease to his quiet now, as though words were no longer required to fill the space. When he did speak, it was to ask if she'd mended the rip in Luke's coat, or whether she'd seen the fox tracks near the chicken coop. Ordinary things. Yet somehow those small exchanges built the walls of a home stronger than any nails. After the meal, Caleb brought out 2 horses, his bay gelding, Duke, and a smaller chestnut mare. Evelyn ran a hand along the mare's neck. The animal's coat was smooth and warm beneath her palm. "Her name's Daisy," Caleb said. "She's gentle. She'll mind you if you're kind." "I can do kind," Evelyn said, smiling. They set out together, following the trail that wound through the cottonwoods and down to the wide meadow beyond. The air shimmered faintly with the scent of thawed earth. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding across the grass. Evelyn rode a few paces behind Caleb, her skirts brushing against the saddle leather. It felt strange and right all at once to move freely again, to feel wind on her face instead of the still air of confinement. She breathed deep, and for a moment, her heart lifted in her chest as though it remembered how to be light. Caleb slowed when they reached the first broken fence. "You still with me back there?" He called. "I'm not lost yet," she said, smiling. He dismounted, checking the posts. "Winter frost split most of the boards. We'll have to replace them before the herd moves in." Evelyn climbed down and steadied the mare. "Show me what to do." "You don't have to," he began. "I know, but I want to." He studied her for a moment, then handed her a length of wire. "All right, then." They worked in rhythm, the afternoon sun warming their backs. Caleb held the new post straight while Evelyn wrapped the wire tight, her fingers red from the effort. When she looked up, she caught him watching her. There was nothing forward in his gaze, only quiet respect and something softer that he didn't name. "Strong hands," he said. "I've had practice," she replied, "doing what's surviving." The answer made him pause. He turned back to the post without comment, but the words stayed with him. By the time they finished, the sky had turned amber. A flock of geese moved overhead, their cries echoing down the valley. Caleb wiped his brow with the back of his sleeve and looked toward the creek. "You should see this place come June," he said. "The hills turn green, and the water runs clear enough to see the trout swim." "It sounds like hope," Evelyn said. He glanced at her. "You talk like a poet. Maybe I just like believing in seasons, On the ride back, they spoke little. The sun dropped behind the mountains, painting the horizon in gold and violet. Evelyn's hands ached from the work, but her heart was strangely light. Each step of the mare beneath her felt like the rhythm of belonging. When they reached the cabin, Luke ran out to meet them, waving a folded newspaper. Mail came in, he shouted. "Mr. Dawson, there's a letter for you and one for Mrs." Carter Evelyn froze. For me, Luke nodded, proud to be the bearer of news from somewhere called Nashville. Caleb handed her the letter, and she stared at the handwriting. It was neat, familiar, and cold. The Callahan family seal pressed in red wax. Her throat tightened. "Bad news?" Caleb asked quietly. Evelyn forced a smile. "Just news." She slipped the letter into her apron pocket, unopened. Later that night, after supper, when the ranch was quiet and Luke had gone to bed, she sat alone by the fire. The envelope lay on her lap, the wall catching the flicker of light. She hesitated before breaking the seal. The letter was short, polite. It said little beyond the obvious that the Callahan household wished her well and that her belongings had been sold to cover expenses. The words were signed not by her mother-in-law, but by a cousin she barely knew. There was no warmth in them, only finality. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, almost tenderly, and fed it to the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished. When Caleb returned from checking the barn, he saw her sitting quietly, the firelight soft on her face. "Everything all right?" "Yes," she said, and for once, it was almost true. "I just said goodbye to something that needed letting go." He didn't ask what. He simply nodded, poured her a cup of coffee, and sat down across from her. They sat in the glow of the flames, saying nothing, yet something between them had shifted. It was no longer just work or necessity that tied them to this place. It was something quieter, something that felt like the start of trust. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing against the cabin walls, but inside, the world was still and warm. Evelyn glanced toward Caleb, who stared into the fire as if seeing something far away. She thought of how he said the land remembered how you treated it. Maybe hearts did too. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the day settle into a calm she hadn't known for years. For the first time since she arrived, the word home didn't feel like a dream too far to reach. The days lengthened, and with them came the restless hum of spring. The creek ran louder now, swollen with meltwater. Everywhere, the land was waking, the willows turning green, the earth breathing again. But inside the ranch house, a quiet tension had begun to stir, subtle as a storm far off on the horizon. It started with a simple disagreement, one that might have passed without notice had it not touched something deeper in both of them. Evelyn had taken to rising early, sometimes before dawn, to begin the chores. She swept, cooked, and mended, not because anyone demanded it, but because order gave her peace. She liked the rhythm of the ranch, the small tasks that made each day feel earned. But Caleb, ever the practical man, thought she was overdoing it. One morning, he found her carrying a sack of grain from the barn to the chicken coop, her face flushed with effort. He frowned. "You shouldn't be hauling feed by yourself." She straightened, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. "I'm capable, Mr. Dawson." "I didn't say you weren't capable," he replied, stepping closer to take the sack from her. "I said you shouldn't be." Her voice sharpened, the edge of pride slipping through, and I said I can handle it. For a moment, they stood in silence, the morning sun glinting off the dust between them. The chickens clucked nervously nearby. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he stepped back. "Fine then. Don't say I didn't warn you." She carried the sack the rest of the way, refusing to look at him. Her arms burned, but she didn't stop. By afternoon, her back ached, and her temper hadn't cooled. Caleb, noticing her limp slightly as she crossed the yard, said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than any reprimand. That evening, over supper, Luke chattered about a calf born near the north pasture. Evelyn smiled faintly, but the air at the table was heavier than usual. When Luke excused himself, the quiet that followed pressed thick between them. Caleb finally said, "You don't have to prove anything here." Evelyn's fork paused midway to her mouth. "I'm not proving anything." He looked at her steadily. "You are, and you don't need to. This isn't the Callahan's house, and I'm not your judge." Her shoulders stiffened. "You think I'm still trying to win someone's favor? I think you don't know how to stop fighting ghosts," he said gently. She set her fork down. "And what would you know about that?" Caleb didn't answer. His gaze dropped to the table. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, more than you'd think. The silence that followed was thick with unsaid things. Evelyn rose quietly, gathered her plate, and began washing it. Caleb watched her for a moment, then stood, putting on his coat. "I'll check the fences," he said, though it was nearly dark. She didn't stop him. When the door closed behind him, the cabin felt emptier than it had in months. The next day, they spoke little. Caleb worked in the fields, fixing the irrigation ditch, while Evelyn stayed near the house, helping Luke with lessons and tending to chores. The rhythm of their days returned, but without the ease it once had. That evening, a cold wind swept down from the hills, and with it came rain. The first drops pattered on the roof as Caleb led the horses into the barn. Evelyn followed, pulling her shawl tight. "Need help," she called over the rain. He shook his head. "You'll get soaked." She stepped closer anyway, stubbornness flashing in her eyes. "So will you." They worked together in silence, tying the stall doors and spreading straw. Thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. The smell of wet hay and earth filled the air. When they finished, the rain had turned to a downpour, drumming hard on the roof. Caleb leaned against a post, water running down his hat brim. Evelyn stood a few feet away, her dress damp, hair curling loose from her braid. For a moment, they simply watched the rain curtain the world outside. He said quietly, "I wasn't trying to tell you what to do." "I know," she said, "but it sounded that way. I just—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "You've been through enough hurt. You don't have to earn your right to stay here." Her eyes softened, but her voice stayed steady. "And you don't have to protect me from the things that make me feel alive again." He looked at her then, really looked. There was no defiance in her face now, only truth. Rain streaked down the window behind her, blurring the line between the outside world and the warmth of the barn. "You make this place different," he said finally. "Better. I just don't want it breaking you the way it's broken others." Her breath caught. "Maybe it's already fixing me." Something unspoken moved between them, fragile as glass. For a heartbeat, the sound of rain filled the space where words should have been. Then Luke's voice called from the house, breaking the spell. "Fire's out. Smoke in the chimney." Caleb and Evelyn exchanged a glance before running back through the rain. Inside, a haze of gray filled the kitchen. Luke waved a towel helplessly as smoke billowed from the stove. Evelyn rushed in, opening the flue and pulling a pot off the burner. Caleb threw open the door, letting the wind draw the smoke out. When the air cleared, Luke looked miserable. "I just wanted to heat up the stew." Caleb ruffled the boy's hair. "Well, you heated it. Nearly cooked the whole house with it." Evelyn laughed, breathless. The tension between her and Caleb melted in that moment, the shared chaos bringing back the ease that had slipped away. Luke grinned sheepishly. "Guess I owe you both supper." Evelyn smiled. "We'll call it even? Later, after the fire was fixed and the air had cleared." Caleb lingered by the doorway while Evelyn dried the last dish. The lamplight cast a soft glow on her face, catching the curve of a smile that she didn't quite hide. He said quietly, "You were right." She glanced up. "About what?" "About the things that make you feel alive." "Maybe I forgot what those are." Evelyn set the dish aside. "Then maybe it's time you remember." Their eyes met, and for once, neither looked away. Outside, the rain eased into a steady whisper, gentle and calm. In the days that followed, their rhythm returned, but it carried something new, something that hadn't been there before. They worked together more often, shared quiet jokes, and learned each other's silences. Luke noticed it first. One morning, he whispered to the dog, "I think they're friends now," as if saying it aloud might scare the truth away. Evelyn's laughter came easier, and Caleb's voice lost its edge. Yet under the peace, something deeper stirred a feeling neither of them named, but both carried like a spark waiting for wind. The thaw had reached the valley. Yes, but it had also reached the hearts that lived there. The last light of evening stretched long and golden over the valley. The cattle grazed quietly near the fence line, and the sound of the creek carried through the soft air. Evelyn stood on the porch, drying her hands on a towel, watching the sky turn from amber to rose. Luke was inside humming a tune as he cleaned the supper dishes. The boy had grown taller since winter, and his sleeves no longer reached his wrists. She'd have to patch them again soon, she thought with a small smile. Caleb stepped out from the barn, wiping oil from his hands. He paused at the bottom of the steps. "You're still working?" "Just watching," she said. "It's too pretty a night to waste inside." He joined her on the porch, leaning against the post. "It's near perfect," he said. "Won't last. The weather out here changes quicker than a man's mind." Evelyn smiled. "Then we'll enjoy it while it lasts." For a while, they stood in companionable silence, the sky deepening into violet. The sound of frogs came from the creek, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. When Luke finished his chores and went to bed, Caleb lingered by the porch rail, his hat in his hands. The lantern light spilled across his face, showing the faint lines of fatigue and something gentler beneath it. "Would you like some coffee?" Evelyn asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "If it's not trouble." "It's never trouble," she said softly. A few minutes later, they sat across from each other near the hearth, two steaming cups between them. The fire burned low, casting soft shadows on the walls. Evelyn tucked her legs beneath her, feeling the familiar comfort of the cabin. Caleb stared into the flames for a long time before he spoke. "You ever think about how you got here?" She looked at him carefully. "You mean to this place, to all of it," he said. "The road that led you." Evelyn turned the cup in her hands. "Every day, but not the way I used to. I used to ask why I was sent away, why I was blamed for things I didn't cause. Now I just wonder what I'm meant to do with what's left." He nodded slowly, the firelight catching in his eyes. You make it sound easy. It isn't. But I got tired of being angry. It's a heavy thing to carry." He let out a quiet breath. "I know that weight." Evelyn studied him. "You've never talked much about before. The war or the people you lost." Caleb's hand tightened around his cup. "Not much to tell. I came home different. Folks don't like to look at what war leaves behind. I had a brother once, Daniel. He didn't make it through. After that, I figured it was easier to stay out here where no one asked questions." Evelyn's voice was soft. "You built all this alone." He nodded. "Started with a single cabin and a few horses. The quiet kept me alive when not much else would." She reached across the table, her fingers brushing the edge of his hand, and now he met her eyes. Now it doesn't feel so quiet anymore. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire cracked softly, throwing sparks that danced in the air. Evelyn felt her pulse quicken, not with fear, but with something fragile and new. She withdrew her hand slowly, unsure what to say. The quiet can be good, but sometimes it hides things that need saying. Caleb looked at her, his voice low. "You've got a way of saying too much and not enough at the same time." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe that's because I'm still learning how to speak again." He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "Then keep talking. The ranch hasn't heard a woman's words in a long while. Feels better when it does." The confession hung in the air like a tender secret. Evelyn looked into the fire. Her heart caught somewhere between comfort and confusion. They sat like that for hours, the night deepening around them. Caleb told her about his mother, how she used to hum while baking bread, how the sound of it stayed with him through the war. Evelyn shared how her mother taught her to sew by lamplight, how the sound of thread pulling through fabric was her idea of peace. By the time the fire burned low, something unspoken had settled between them, a trust built not of words, but of quiet understanding. When Caleb finally stood, the light caught the edge of his smile. "You'll catch cold sitting up so late." "I'm fine," she said. "It's the first time in years I've felt like staying awake to see the fire die." He paused by the door. "Good night, Evelyn." It was the first time he'd said her name without the polite distance of Mrs. Carter. The sound of it lingered in the room long after he left. Evelyn sat there a while longer, staring at the faint glow of the coals. Her heart ached in a way that wasn't pain, exactly more like remembering how to feel alive. When she finally rose, she glanced toward the hallway, where his shadow had disappeared, and whispered, "Good night, Caleb." The next morning came bright and clear, the kind of morning that made the world feel newly washed. Evelyn was already at the table kneading dough when Caleb came in, hair damp from washing at the pump. "Smells good," he said. "It's just bread," she replied. He smiled. "Not the way you make it." Luke, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, grinned. "He's right. Miss Evelyn's bread could bring a preacher to tears." Evelyn laughed, shaking her head. "Then I'll make extra for Sunday." The small exchange felt ordinary, yet it filled the cabin with warmth. For the first time, Evelyn realized she wasn't simply helping run a ranch anymore. She was part of it, woven into the days, the work, the laughter. Later that evening, while checking the fence line, Caleb paused on the ridge overlooking the valley. The sun dipped low, the fields awash in gold. He thought about the months before Evelyn arrived, how empty the place had felt despite all the work and order. Now there was music in the mornings, laughter at the table, and light in the windows long after dusk. He didn't know when it had happened, but somewhere along the way, She had filled the silences he once depended on. And for the first time in years, the quiet didn't comfort him. It made him miss her voice. That night, as Evelyn sat by the fire again, she opened her journal, the same one she had carried from Tennessee. She read the final line, written months before. If the road grows dark, walk toward the faintest light. She dipped her pen and added beneath it, sometimes the light isn't a place, it's a person. The ink glistened for a moment before soaking into the page. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the darkness, Caleb's footsteps passed near her window. She didn't call out. She didn't need to. The rhythm of his stride was enough to let her know she was no longer alone. The sky over Willow Creek had turned the color of slate by late afternoon. Wind pressed against the windows, and thunder rolled somewhere deep in the mountains. Caleb stood near the barn, watching the clouds gather like soldiers on the horizon. He'd seen storms like this before, swift and mean, tearing across the plains with a temper that could ruin fences and drown calves in minutes. He turned toward the cabin and called out, "Evelyn, Luke, bring in what you can from the porch." Evelyn appeared at the doorway, skirts caught in the wind, hair whipping loose from its braid. "It's coming fast," she said. "Too fast." Caleb replied, "We'll need to tie down the feed wagon before it tips." Luke ran past them toward the coop, shouting over his shoulder, "I'll get the hens." Rain began in thick drops, cold and heavy, spattering the dirt into mud. Evelyn hurried to gather the linens from the line, her hands trembling as lightning split the sky. Caleb caught the corner of a sheet before the wind tore it away. "Leave it," he said. "Get inside." "I won't leave you out here," she called back. But the wind swallowed her words. He grabbed her wrist gently, pulling her toward the porch. "I'll be right behind you. Go." She hesitated, eyes flashing with worry, but she obeyed. As soon as she crossed the threshold, a gust of wind slammed the door behind her. Caleb turned back toward the barn, where the horses whinnied in panic. The storm hit full force, rain driving sideways, thunder cracking like gunfire. He fought his way through it, heart-pounding. Inside the barn, the animals kicked and cried. He moved fast, tying reins, calming the mare with quiet words. Then he heard it, a shout carried by the wind. "Mr. Dawson," helped Luke's voice. Caleb ran toward the sound, slipping through the mud, water stinging his face. He found the boy near the creek, half soaked, clutching a broken coop door. It blew loose. Luke gasped. The hens scattered. Before Caleb could answer, a sudden flash lit the world, followed by a crack so loud it shook the ground. A tree near the bank split and fell, the trunk crashing into the stream. Caleb threw himself over the boy, shielding him as debris flew. When the noise faded, both of them were covered in mud and breathless. Caleb hauled Luke up. "We're done here. Move together." They stumbled back to the barn, half running through sheets of rain. Evelyn stood waiting by the doorway, soaked to the skin, her face pale with fear. "Thank God," she whispered when she saw them. She rushed forward, helping Luke inside, then turned to Caleb. "You're bleeding." He touched his temple and saw blood on his fingers, a shallow cut from flying wood. "I've had worse." Evelyn pressed a cloth to his head, her hands shaking. "You shouldn't have gone after him alone." He caught her wrist gently. "You'd have done the same." Her eyes met his, angry, scared, relieved all at once. "Yes," she said softly, "I would have." The storm raged through the night. They stayed in the barn, the safest place on the property. Evelyn tended the fire in the small stove while Caleb checked the animals. Luke sat wrapped in a blanket, staring wide-eyed at the flashes of lightning that turned the world white. When the thunder quieted at last, Evelyn handed Caleb a clean cloth for his cut. "Hold still," she said, dabbing carefully. He smiled faintly. "You're bossier when you're scared, and you're impossible when you're hurt," she shot back, but her tone was gentle. He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "You didn't have to wait out here with me?" "I couldn't stay inside," she admitted, not knowing. Her hand lingered near his face. The air between them felt charged different from the storm outside, but no less powerful. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the barn door creaked open. A shadow stepped inside. Evelyn gasped, reaching for the lantern. The figure that entered was tall, soaked through, with a beard and worn coat. His eyes darted around before settling on Caleb. "Evening," the man said, voice rough. "Didn't mean to intrude. Storm near tore my wagon apart." Caleb straightened. "Road's bad tonight. You traveling far west," the stranger said. "Name's Mason Turner. I saw your light and figured maybe you'd let me rest a spell." Evelyn exchanged a quick glance with Caleb. Travelers weren't uncommon, but not all meant well. Still, she saw no malice in the man's eyes, just exhaustion. Caleb nodded slowly. "We've got coffee and a fire. You can dry off here." "Obliged," Mason said, stepping closer. His coat dripped onto the dirt floor, and when he smiled, the lines around his eyes deepened. Didn't expect to find company this far out. Evelyn poured him coffee, her manner cautious but kind. The storm's no night to be alone. Mason accepted the cup. "You speak truth, ma'am." His gaze lingered a little too long on her face before turning back to Caleb. "You run this place yourself." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "I do." Mason's eyes flicked to Evelyn again. "Fine company you keep." Luke, sensing the tension, sat up straighter. "She helps run the ranch, same as Mr. Dawson," he said proudly. Mason chuckled. "Well then, that's luck for you all around." Evelyn smiled politely but said nothing more. She felt Caleb's unease, subtle but sharp. Something about the man's manner didn't sit right. When dawn broke, the rain had stopped. The world outside was soaked and glistening, steam rising from the fields as the sun began to warm the earth again. Mason gathered his things, thanking them for shelter. Before leaving, he turned to Evelyn. "If you ever head west, ma'am, there's work in Helena. Decent pay for a woman with a clear head." Evelyn blinked, surprised. "Thank you, but I have work here." Mason smiled thinly. "Suit yourself." After he left, Caleb stood by the open barn door, watching until the man disappeared down the road. Evelyn joined him. "You don't trust him. Men who smile that easy usually want something," he said. "Maybe he was just being kind." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but kindness wears a lot of faces out here." She looked at him, then said softly, "So does fear." He turned to her, eyes meeting hers with something unreadable. "You're not afraid of much, are you?" "Not anymore," she said. "Not since I learned what's worth standing for." Caleb studied her face, the way her eyes caught the morning light. "And what's that people who care enough to stay?" she said simply. The words hung there, quiet and certain. Luke came running from the cabin just then, holding a small wildflower he'd found near the creek. "Miss Evelyn!" "Look, it's the first one this season." Evelyn crouched to take it, smiling. "It's beautiful." "Luke." She looked up to find Caleb watching her. Something soft and unguarded in his expression. The storm had passed, but something had shifted, something neither of them could quite name yet. As the morning light spread over the valley, Evelyn tucked the flower behind her ear. Caleb turned away, pretending to check the fence, but the faint smile on his lips gave him away. The sun climbed high over Willow Creek, turning the grass into waves of gold. Days after the storm, life had returned to its quiet rhythm. The fences had been mended, the animals calm again, and the air carried the sweet scent of wild sage. But for Evelyn, something had shifted since that night. The storm had left behind a trace of restlessness, a sense that peace was too fragile to trust completely. She found herself watching the road more often, the long dirt stretch that cut through the valley. It was habit now, though she wasn't sure what she was looking for. Perhaps she half expected Mason Turner to return, his easy smile hiding things she couldn't name. Or perhaps she was waiting for something else, entirely news, change, fate. That morning, while Caleb and Luke were in the north field, a rider appeared on the road, kicking up dust in the heat. Evelyn shaded her eyes with one hand. The man was unfamiliar, carrying a leather satchel slung over his shoulder. When he reached the gate, he tipped his hat politely. "Morning, ma'am. Got post from the east," he said. "Came through Helena 2 days back." Evelyn's heart skipped. She hadn't received mail since the burned letter from the Callahans months ago. "Thank you," she said, taking the small bundle. "Anything for the Dawsons," the man added, handing her another envelope before riding off down the trail. She stood on the porch, the letters trembling slightly in her hands. One bore Caleb's name, written in a firm, masculine hand. The other was addressed to her, but this one she recognized. The handwriting was neat, controlled the same careful script that had once labeled every item in her late husband's study. It was William's brother, Henry Callahan. She felt her stomach tighten. For a moment she considered burning it unread, as she had the last one, but something in her refused to keep running from ghosts. She slipped the letter into her pocket and set aside Caleb's on the table. When the men returned later, sweat streaked across their brows. Evelyn met them with cool water and quiet smiles. "There's mail," she said, handing Caleb his envelope. "From someone named Parker. I think—" Caleb wiped his hands and broke the seal. "Parker runs the supply line up near Fort Benton," he explained. "He's been after me about selling cattle for the Army." "Is that good news?" Luke asked. "Could be," Caleb said, scanning the letter. "They're paying better than last year. It'd mean more work, though, and travel." Evelyn's heart sank before she could stop it. "Travel?" she asked. He nodded. 3, maybe 4 weeks on the trail. I'd take Luke along for the drive. Could be a chance to make something bigger of this place." She smiled, though her chest tightened. "Then you should go." He glanced at her. "You'll manage fine. I've managed worse." He held her gaze a moment longer than necessary. "I know you have." That night, after supper, she went out to the porch alone. The moon hung low and yellow, casting the land in pale silver. From inside came the faint sound of Luke's laughter and Caleb's voice, low, warm, steady. The sound wrapped around her like comfort and ache all at once. She took the letter from her pocket and opened it. "Mrs. Carter, I write not from malice, but duty. The family in Tennessee still considers you bound by the Callahan name, despite your departure. There have been inquiries, one from a lawyer seeking confirmation of certain estate matters following your husband's passing. It appears your late husband left more than debts. There was land, modest but unclaimed, under your name. If you return to settle the matter, you may yet restore your standing. But be warned, the family's patience is not without limit. Respectfully, Henry Callahan. The words struck like stones. For years she had lived as if that chapter were closed, her ties to that name buried with William. Now, just when she'd found peace, the world back east had remembered her. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "Restore my standing," she whispered. The phrase sounded hollow now. Standing among people who had never let her stand at all. She didn't notice Caleb until he spoke softly behind her. "Bad news." She turned, startled. He leaned in the doorway, lamplight outlining his frame. His shirt sleeves were rolled, and his expression was unreadable. "Not bad," she said quietly. "Just unfinished." He stepped closer, his voice low. "Something from the Callahans." She hesitated, then handed him the letter. "It seems they haven't quite let me go." He read it carefully, his brow tightening. When he looked up, his eyes were steady. "You're not going back." It wasn't a question. It was certainty, spoken with the quiet force of conviction. Evelyn's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I have a choice. There's land something they say is mine. If I don't claim it, they will." "Let them," he said. "Whatever they're offering isn't worth what it'll cost you." She looked away. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything that once defined you." "Yes, I do," he said simply. "That's why I'm telling you it's better to build new than chase what burned down." His voice carried no judgment, only truth. But it cut deep anyway, because she knew he was right. "Caleb," she said quietly, "you don't know what it means to have no name at all." He took a step closer, his tone firm but gentle. "Then take mine." The words stunned her. He seemed just as surprised to hear them out loud. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the sound of crickets and the low rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. "I didn't mean," he began, but she stopped him. "Yes, you did," she whispered. Her heart was pounding, her breath caught, but not like that. He looked away, jaw tense. "You belong here. Evelyn, that's all I meant." She studied him, her voice soft. "Maybe, but what if belonging isn't enough anymore?" He didn't answer. The distance between them felt heavier than any storm. After a long moment, he turned toward the yard. "I'll think on the cattle drive," he said, his voice low. "We'll talk tomorrow." When he walked away, Evelyn remained on the porch, staring after him until the darkness swallowed his figure. She sank into the chair and stared up at the stars. The sky stretched wide and merciless, full of things she couldn't name. She thought about Henry's letter, about Caleb's words, about the warmth in his voice when he'd said her name days before. She thought of the ache that came from wanting to stay, and the fear that came from daring to. For years, the world had decided for her. Tonight, for the first time, she realized she would have to choose for herself. The next morning, Caleb left before sunrise, riding out to check the herds. Evelyn found the note he'd left on the table, short, practical, but kind. Gone to the ridge. Back before sundown. "Don't worry the boy. See." She smiled faintly at the familiar tone, then folded the note into her pocket next to Henry's letter. Two worlds pressed against her heart, one built of the past, one of the life she'd built here. Luke came bounding down the stairs, full of energy. "Morning. Miss Evelyn. Mr. Dawson gone already." "He has," she said. We'll manage fine." "Course we will," the boy said proudly. "We always do." She looked out the window at the distant line of the mountains, glowing blue in the morning light. "Yes," she murmured, "we do." But in her chest, something had begun to stir, a quiet knowing that the past was not finished with her yet. The morning after the letter, the ranch felt quieter than usual. The wind had dropped, and the sun burned low and golden across the fields. Evelyn worked through the chores, automatically feeding the hens, kneading dough, sweeping the porch, but her thoughts were miles away. The letter from Henry Callahan sat folded in her apron pocket, heavy as stone. Caleb had been gone since dawn, driving cattle toward the northern ridge. He'd left no more notes, no more words. The air between them had cooled, though not from anger. It was the kind of quiet that followed something almost spoken, a truth both of them had felt but hadn't dared to name. Luke noticed it first. While helping her collect eggs, he said, "Miss Evelyn, are you mad at Mr. Dawson?" She blinked, surprised. "No, of course not." The boy frowned. "You don't talk to him. The same? He don't talk to you much either." Evelyn forced a smile. "Sometimes grown folks just get lost in their own thoughts." He nodded solemnly. "When I get lost, I whistle. Helps me find my way back." She chuckled, tousling his hair. "Then I'll have to try that sometime." But as the day wore on, her smile faded. She couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her was shifting, like a gate unlatched in a storm. By afternoon, a rider approached from the south, a tall man on a gray horse, waving a small parcel. It was Samuel Grant, the postmaster from Clearwater, who often delivered supplies. He dismounted at the fence and called out, "Got word from town, Mrs. Carter. Heard you might be coming in soon." Evelyn stiffened. "Coming in? Who said?" "That letter came through the station master." Samuel said there's business from Tennessee waiting at the telegraph office. Something about your claim." She felt the air leave her chest. "So they've already written ahead." "Seems so." Samuel replied, "They said it's urgent. If you're planning to travel, roads are clear for now. Storms will start again come fall." Evelyn took the note from him and thanked him with a polite smile, though her mind was spinning. After he rode off, she stood for a long while under the sun, clutching the slip of paper. It was real now. They weren't going to let her rest. That night, when Caleb returned, she was waiting on the porch. His shirt was dusted with trail dirt, his hat pulled low. He stopped short when he saw her face. "What happened?" "Another message?" she said quietly. "From Tennessee. They've written ahead to the town. There's business waiting about the land." Caleb took a slow breath. "You're thinking of going?" "I need to know what they want," she said. "If there's property in my name, it could mean a clean break. I could settle it once and for all." He frowned. "Or it could drag you back where you don't belong." "Maybe," she said. "But if I don't face it, they'll keep finding me." He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "You don't owe those people anything." She met his eyes, voice low but firm. "I owe it to myself to stop hiding from them." Caleb looked away toward the darkening sky. "Then I'm coming with you." She blinked. "That's not necessary?" "Yes, it is," he said, his tone final. "It's a long ride, and you shouldn't go alone." There was no arguing with him. The matter was settled, though neither looked particularly relieved. They left at first light 2 days later. Luke stayed behind to tend the animals, puffing up with pride at being trusted with the ranch. Don't you worry. Miss Evelyn, he said, I'll keep everything running till you get back. Evelyn smiled, touching his shoulder. I know you will. As they rode out, the air was cool and clear, the prairie stretching endlessly ahead. Evelyn felt the weight of the road, the sound of hooves, the creak of leather, the silence between them that neither knew how to break. For hours they rode in near silence, until the faint outlines of clear water appeared on the horizon. Small, sun-baked, with the usual mix of saloons, shops, and a few whitewashed houses. The town smelled of dust and horses and faint sweetness from the bakery near the corner. Caleb dismounted first, tying his horse near the general store. I'll take care of supplies, he said. You see to your letter. Evelyn nodded, her stomach twisting. The telegraph office stood across the street, its door open to the warm air. The clerk inside, a thin man with spectacles, looked up as she entered. You're Mrs. Carter, I presume. Yes, she said. You have correspondence for me. He rummaged through a stack of papers and handed her a folded telegram. Came through 2 days ago. Marked urgent, she unfolded it, her eyes scanning the lines. Returned to Nashville to finalize the state transfer. Her claim unresolved. Without appearance, rights will default to Callahan family. Attorney James H. Rowe. She read it twice, her hands trembling slightly. The words were cold, impersonal, but final. If she didn't return, everything connected to William's name would belong to his family, the same people who'd cast her out. She stood frozen until the clerk cleared his throat. You all right, ma'am? She forced a smile. Yes, thank you. Outside, the air felt heavier. She crossed the street slowly, the paper clutched tight in her hand. Caleb was waiting by the horses, a small burlap sack of flour and coffee tied behind his saddle. When he saw her face, his expression hardened. What did it say? She handed him the telegram. He read it in silence, then looked up sharply. You can't be serious about going back. They're giving me a choice, she said quietly. I either face them or let them erase me completely. They already tried to erase you, he said. You built something better here. Evelyn looked at him, voice trembling. But it's not just about me, Caleb. It's about doing what's right. I can't start new if I keep running from old ghosts. He stepped closer. And if you go back, what happens then? You think they'll welcome you. You think they'll see who you've become. I don't need their approval, she said. Just the truth. For a long moment, neither moved. The town hummed quietly around them, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the cry of a train whistle in the distance. Then Caleb said, I won't let you go alone. She shook her head. You have the ranch. Luke needs you. He clenched his jaw. Then take me with you in spirit, if nothing else. But promise me you'll come back. Her eyes softened. You think I could forget this place? Forget you. He looked down, then back at her. I'm not worried about forgetting. I'm worried about losing. Her throat tightened, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. I'll come back, she whispered. I promise. He nodded once, then handed her the reins. Then let's get you ready. That evening, they stayed in town at the small inn near the church. Evelyn sat by the window of her room, watching the lamplight flicker on the dusty street below. Caleb was downstairs, talking with the stable hand. She pressed her palm to the glass, her reflection faint in the darkening window. She thought of Tennessee, of the house that had never felt like home, of William's ghost that lingered in every memory. And then she thought of Willow Creek, the laughter at breakfast, Luke's crooked smile, Caleb's voice saying her name like it meant something new. The road between them had never felt longer. When Caleb returned to check on her, she turned to him and managed a small smile. "I'll leave with the morning coach," she said. "The sooner I go, the sooner I can come back." He studied her face, as if memorizing it. "I'll hold you to that." She stepped closer, close enough to smell the faint scent of smoke and cedar on his shirt. "You always do." For a heartbeat, the world was silent. Then he reached for his hat, nodded, and stepped back toward the door. "Good night, Evelyn." Her voice caught softly behind him. "Good night, Caleb." When the door closed, she sank to the chair and whispered to the empty room, "Don't let this be goodbye." Outside, thunder murmured far away, rolling over the plains. Not a storm yet, but the promise of one. The stagecoach left Clearwater before dawn, the air cool and damp with the promise of rain. Evelyn sat by the window, gloved hands folded neatly in her lap, watching as the world she knew slipped away. The golden plains fading into gray hills, then forest, then distant towns she didn't recognize. The rhythm of the wheels on the road was steady, almost hypnotic. She could still hear Caleb's voice from the night before. "I'll hold you to that." She smiled faintly to herself. He hadn't said goodbye, and she was grateful for it. There was a kind of quiet faith in that restraint, a belief that she would come back. As the miles stretched on, the land began to change. The vast openness of the frontier gave way to fences and farms, then brick towns, then railroads humming with industry. People filled the streets, merchants, porters, children in shoes too fine for dirt roads. The world grew louder, faster, more crowded than she remembered. By the time she stepped off the train in Nashville 3 days later, her heart felt like it was walking into a memory that had soured. The city smelled of smoke and iron. Carriages clattered along cobbled streets, and fine women in bonnets glanced at her with that same polite curiosity she'd known years ago, the kind that measured you first, then judged you second. At the edge of the station stood Henry Callahan, tall and trim in a gray coat, his face untouched by time or warmth. When he spotted her, he removed his hat but didn't smile. "Mrs. Carter," he said formally. "Or do you prefer Miss Evelyn these days?" She drew herself up, calm but steady. "Evelyn is fine." He nodded once, offering his arm without invitation. "Come, I've arranged a carriage. You must be tired." As they rode through the streets, Henry spoke of practical things: papers, land, signatures, but his tone was as clipped as his posture. He didn't ask how she'd been, didn't ask if she was well. When the carriage stopped before the Callahan townhouse, she hesitated. The building stood just as it had years ago, tall, white, immaculate, like a monument to pretense. The windows gleamed, but no light came from inside. Inside, the servants greeted her with rehearsed politeness. None met her eyes. Henry led her to the sitting room. "I won't pretend this is comfortable for either of us," he said, "but there are matters that must be resolved. The property in your name was part of William's holdings before his death. The family wishes to reclaim it." Evelyn's voice was steady. "They can't. The deed was placed in my care legally." Henry sighed, as though speaking to a stubborn child. "You misunderstand. It was held in your name for convenience. You never truly owned it." "Then why write to me at all?" she asked. "Because your signature is required to finalize the transfer," he said. "We'd prefer not to make a public case of it." Evelyn stared at him. "And if I refuse?" His lips thinned. Then you'll find the city less welcoming than you remember." The words struck her like a slap. Not loud, not cruel, but cutting in their civility. She stood, chin lifted. "You sent me away once, Henry. I won't let you do it again." He met her gaze evenly. "You think you've changed because you've spent time among ranchers and dirt farmers? You're still a Callahan widow. That's all society will ever see." She wanted to shout, to throw his arrogance back at him, but she didn't. Instead, she took a slow breath and said quietly, "Then I'd rather be a dirt farmer with honor than a Callahan with none." For the first time, he faltered just a flicker in his eyes, a hint of surprise. Evelyn turned toward the door. "Have the papers sent to the boarding house? I'll read them myself." When she stepped outside, the air felt sharper, freer. For the first time since arriving, she could breathe. That evening, she found a small room above the bakery near the river. The owner, Mrs. Holloway, was a kind woman with a soft accent and flower on her apron. "You're a long way from home, dear," she said as she handed over the key. "Yes," Evelyn replied softly. "I suppose I am." In the quiet of her room, she unpacked the small things she'd brought: her journal, a shawl, a few keepsakes from Willow Creek. Caleb's note was tucked among them. She read it again, fingers brushing the ink. "Don't worry the boy. I'll be waiting." She smiled faintly and whispered, "You always are." Later that night, a knock sounded at her door. When she opened it, a man stood there holding a small parcel. "Message for Mrs. Carter," he said. "Came by rail courier from Montana." Her heart leapt. She signed the ledger and closed the door quickly, tearing open the paper. Inside was a folded letter and something wrapped in cloth. The letter was short, written in Caleb's careful hand. "The ranch is fine. Luke misses you, though he won't say it. He fixed the barn door himself yesterday, said you'd have been proud. The fields are greener this year. I reckon you brought the rain with you when you left. Come home when you can. Nothing's right without you here." Beneath the letter lay a small wooden carving, a wildflower, rough but delicate, shaped from the same cottonwood tree that grew by the creek. Her eyes filled with tears. She traced the petals with her thumb, the grain of the wood warm against her skin. "Caleb," she whispered, "you fool-hearted man." Days passed, each one blurring into the next. She met with Henry's lawyer, reviewed the papers, listened to words like title, transfer, signature, until they lost all meaning. The land they wanted wasn't just property. It was her past, everything she'd been forced to leave behind. But one clause caught her attention. If the heir's claim is not signed or contested by August 1st, ownership will revert to the family permanently. She looked at the date. 2 weeks. 2 weeks to decide whether to let go or to fight. That night, she wrote in her journal by lamplight, "They took my name, but not my will. I will not sign away what I was, not until I know who I am now." The words steadied her. The next morning, she walked to the attorney's office and spoke firmly. "Tell Henry Callahan that I will not sign his papers. If he wants my land, he'll have to see me in court." The man blinked. "Ma'am, that's not wise. The Callahans, I know what they are," she interrupted. "That's why it ends here." When she left the building, the sky above Nashville was a bright, defiant blue, the same color, she thought, as the sky over Montana. She stood on the corner, the city bustling around her, and realized she wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time since she'd stepped off the train, she knew exactly who she was. She was Evelyn Carter, not the widow they'd shamed, Not the runaway they pitied. Just a woman who'd built a life from dust and had something worth fighting for. And far away, on the plains of Willow Creek, a man was waiting, believing she'd find her way back home. The courthouse stood at the edge of the square, a white stone building that gleamed in the summer sun. Its columns rose tall and cold against the sky, a monument to laws written by men who'd never tilled a field or stitched a hem by lamplight. Evelyn stood on the steps, gloves in hand, her pulse steady but strong. She had thought she would feel fear, but all she felt was clarity. Inside, the air was thick with heat and whispers. The Callahan family had turned out in full Henry in his silver waistcoat, his sister Margaret fanning herself behind him. The family lawyer seated beside a stack of papers that looked more like a wall than evidence. Evelyn's own counsel, a quiet man named Mr. Avery, stood next to her. He'd met her the day before, reviewed the case, and said with gentle respect, "You've got a strong claim, Mrs. Carter, but it takes more than law to win against men like this. It takes nerve." Now, standing before the judge, she understood what he meant. Henry rose first, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "Your Honor, this case concerns property left under my late brother William Callahan's estate. Mrs. Carter, though a widow, held temporary claim to the land in question. Our position is simple. She has neither the means nor the intent to maintain the property. We ask that ownership revert to the family." The judge nodded, turning to Evelyn. "And your response, Mrs. Carter?" She stepped forward, her voice calm but sure. "My late husband's property was deeded in my name, not as a loan, not as a courtesy, but because I worked beside him to build it. After his death, the Callahans sent me away. They said I had no place among them. Now that the land has value again, they wish to claim it. I won't allow it." Henry's lips twitched. Emotional appeals aside, "Your Honor, the law favors rightful lineage." "Lineage," Evelyn interrupted. "Or pride," the courtroom murmured. Henry's eyes narrowed. She continued, her tone steady. "The Callahans never cared about that land when it needed tending. They left it fallow, while men and women out west fight every day just to make something grow. If my name is on that deed, it's because I earned it, because I stayed when no one else did." The judge's gaze softened. "Do you have proof, Mrs. Carter?" "I have letters," she said, handing over the packet she'd carried in her satchel, the ones William had written years ago, thanking her for her labor, her vision, her care. "And I have witness statements from the bank officer who filed the deed. It was my signature that secured the loan. My husband may have owned the Callahan name, but the work, the risk was ours together." Henry scoffed. "You think sentiment wins cases?" She looked at him directly. "No, but truth does." The judge read through the letters, silent for several minutes. The room was still, save for the slow hum of the ceiling fan turning above. At last, he looked up. "Mr. Callahan, unless you can provide evidence contradicting these documents, I see no legal basis to void Mrs. Carter's claim." Henry's voice sharpened. "This woman left her duties as a wife. She abandoned her family. I was cast out," Evelyn said quietly. "And you know it." Something flickered in his eyes. Guilt, anger, or both. The judge raised a hand. "Enough. This court will not judge personal character. It will judge law. And by law, Mrs. Carter retains full rights to the property." A wave of murmurs filled the room. Evelyn stood still, barely breathing, Henry's face drained of color. The judge continued. "Furthermore, the The Callahan family will bear the cost of all legal fees associated with this claim. Case dismissed. The gavel struck once. Evelyn exhaled, the sound trembling like the release of years she hadn't realized she'd been holding in. She gathered her papers quietly, ignoring the sharp whispers behind her. As she turned to leave, Henry caught her arm. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You think one victory makes you our equal." She looked him square in the eye. "No, Henry, it makes me free." She walked out into the sunlight, the sound of her boots echoing on the marble floor. Outside, the world felt different, brighter, wider, alive. People hurried past her, none knowing what had just been fought and won inside that courthouse. She stood on the steps for a long moment, breathing in the thick August air. She'd thought the moment would feel triumphant, but instead, it felt quiet, like the hush after a long storm. Victory, she realized, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was just the sound of one's own heartbeat, steady and certain. At the corner of the square, a small telegraph office stood beside the post. She stepped inside, her hand still trembling slightly. The clerk looked up. "Message to send, ma'am." She nodded and scribbled on the slip of paper, her handwriting firm, "Caleb Dawson, Willow Creek Ranch, Montana Territory. It's over. The land is mine. I'm coming home. E." When she handed it over, the clerk smiled. Big news. She returned the smile softly. The biggest. That evening, as the sun sank over the city, Evelyn packed her things. She folded the shawl from Montana carefully, then placed Caleb's carving at the top of her trunk. The tiny wooden flower caught the last light through the window, glowing gold like something alive. "Mrs." Holloway knocked on her door, holding a small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "You'll be leaving us?" "Then yes," Evelyn said. "In the morning." "Good," the older woman said warmly. "You've had that look, the one of someone who's already half gone somewhere better." Evelyn laughed softly. "Maybe I have. Before bed." She wrote one last entry in her journal today. "I stood in a room where they once told me I had no worth. I spoke, and they had to listen. Tomorrow, I'll ride west again, not to escape, but to return. I have a name now, not the one they gave me, but the one I've earned." When she blew out the lamp, the room fell into gentle darkness. Outside, crickets sang in the summer heat, and far across the miles, in a quiet cabin beneath the Montana sky, Caleb Dawson would soon be reading her telegram, his heart rising with every word. He would set it down, look out toward the horizon, and whisper what she already knew in her bones. Come home. Evelyn. The door's still open. The train left Nashville at dawn, its whistle echoing through the hills like a farewell. Evelyn sat by the window, hands clasped in her lap, watching the city fade into the horizon. The courthouse, the narrow streets, the Callahan mansion, all of it slipped away beneath the hum of the rails. She had thought she'd feel triumph. Instead, she felt something deeper, peace. The kind that comes after long struggle, after years of silence finally broken. She opened her satchel and unfolded Caleb's letter again, reading the lines until she could almost hear his voice. "Come home when you can. Nothing's right without you here." Outside the window, the countryside stretched wide and golden. Children waved from farm fences. Rivers glimmered in the distance, and the air seemed to grow lighter with every mile she put between herself and the past. By the third day, the land began to open into the Great Plains again. The horizon stretched forever, the sky impossibly blue. Evelyn leaned her head against the glass, smiling faintly. Almost there, she whispered to herself. At a small station in Kansas, she stopped for the night. The air smelled of dust and sage, and the innkeeper's wife offered her a bowl of stew and a quiet place by the fire. As Evelyn ate, she noticed a young couple at a nearby table, a farmer and his wife, newly married by the look of them. They spoke softly, their hands brushing now and then. The woman laughed, her voice bright and full of promise. Evelyn smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. She remembered being that age hopeful, full of plans, but she also remembered the years that followed loss, exile, the long road that had led her west. It struck her then how strange and beautiful life could be, that she could have walked through sorrow and still find herself capable of wanting more. Later that evening, when she returned to her room, she took out her journal and wrote, "There are two kinds of journeys, the one that takes you away and the one that brings you home. I have made both, and somehow they've led me to the same place. Days passed in rhythm train whistles, small towns, open skies, somewhere in Nebraska." She began to write again, this time not for herself, but for Caleb. "Dear Caleb, by now you will have my telegram. The case is settled, the land is mine. But more than that, I am free. I will be home soon, before the first frost. Tell Luke to save me a place at the table, and tell the hens I expect eggs waiting. I miss the sound of the creek and the way the mountains look at dusk, but mostly, I miss you. Evelyn." She sealed the letter and handed it to the conductor at the next stop, her pulse quickening. That night, as the train rattled through the darkness, she dreamed of Willow Creek, the cottonwood tree, Luke's laughter, and Caleb standing by the gate, hat in hand, eyes steady and kind. When she woke, dawn was breaking, painting the land in gold. She pressed a hand to her heart and whispered, "Almost home." Meanwhile, at Willow Creek Ranch, Caleb was sitting at the porch table when Luke came running from the road, waving a letter above his head. "It's from Miss Evelyn." Caleb took it carefully, his thumb tracing the neat script. He read it once, then again, his lips pressing into a slow smile. "She's coming home," Luke said, grinning ear to ear. Caleb nodded. "Before the frost, she says." The boy's eyes sparkled. "We should fix her garden. Then, she liked those yellow flowers by the steps." Caleb chuckled. "Reckon we should." So, over the next days, they worked side by side. Luke mended the chicken coop while Caleb repainted the porch rail. They replanted the small patch of wildflowers Evelyn had once admired. The ranch felt alive again, as if the earth itself knew someone was returning. At night, Caleb sat by the fire, carving another small figure from wood. This time it wasn't a flower, it was a bird, wings spread, caught in mid-flight. He wasn't sure why he made it, only that it felt right. When Luke asked about it, Caleb said simply, "For someone who found her way back." Evelyn's journey continued westward. She crossed endless miles of grassland, passing through settlements and quiet valleys. Each night she grew more certain she had been right to fight, right to return. Yet beneath her calm, there was a flicker of doubt she couldn't quite shake. She had left Caleb with a promise, but promises could fade with time. What if her absence had changed things? What if he'd grown distant, or worse, given up waiting? She caught herself smiling at the thought. "No," she murmured. "Not him." The final leg of the journey took her by wagon through the foothills. The air grew thinner, cooler. By the time she reached the familiar bend of the road leading to Willow Creek, the sun was low and the sky blushed with evening. Her heart pounded. She could see the ranch in the distance, the outline of the barn, smoke curling from the chimney, the fields glowing in the last light of day. Every step closer felt like a heartbeat. Caleb was standing by the gate when he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a rider at sunset, dust trailing behind. But as she drew nearer, he saw the familiar way she held the reins, the tilt of her hat, the quiet grace of her movement. He didn't move at first. He just watched, the world narrowing to the sound of her horse's hooves. When she finally stopped before him, neither spoke. The air between them was charged with everything they hadn't said in months. "You kept your promise," he said softly. "I told you I would," she replied. Her voice trembled, but her smile didn't. Luke came running from the barn, shouting with joy, "Miss Evelyn, you're home." Evelyn laughed, dismounting quickly to pull the boy into an embrace. "I missed you. Luke, you've grown half a foot, maybe a whole one," he said proudly. Caleb stepped closer, his hat in his hands. "You won. Then—" She nodded. "Yes, but it wasn't the victory I thought I wanted." He frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, eyes bright. "It turns out I didn't fight for land or a name. I fought for the right to come back here, to belong." Caleb's throat tightened. "You've always belonged here." Evelyn smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then I'm home for good." For a long moment, they simply stood there, no grand gestures, no words needed. The sunset spilled gold across the fields, and the breeze carried the faint scent of sage and pine. Finally, Caleb reached into his pocket and handed her the small carving the bird in flight. "Made this while you were gone," he said. "Didn't know what it meant until now." She turned it over in her hands, her eyes glistening. "It means I made it home. That night, as the stars bloomed across the Montana sky." Evelyn sat on the porch beside Caleb. Luke had long since gone to bed, leaving the two of them in quiet companionship. Evelyn leaned back, the sound of the creek faint in the distance. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "why life brings us through so much just to end up where we started?" Caleb smiled faintly. "Maybe because we needed the journey to see what was always worth keeping." She looked at him, eyes tender. "Then I suppose I had to lose everything to find this." He reached over, taking her hand. "And I reckon I had to wait to understand what it meant to be found." They sat in silence then, fingers intertwined, the world around them still and alive. The night wind moved gently through the cottonwoods, whispering like a hymn of journeys ended, hearts mended, and the simple, unspoken grace of coming home. The first frost came early that year, dusting the grass in silver. Each morning, the air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke, and the creek's murmur seemed softer, as if whispering secrets only the land could keep. Evelyn stood on the porch at dawn, shawl drawn tight around her shoulders, watching mist rise from the fields. She'd been home nearly 3 weeks, long enough for the rhythm of the ranch to settle around her again, but something inside her had shifted. The peace she'd fought for in Nashville had followed her back, but so had a new restlessness. It was gentler now, less fear and more ache, a longing she couldn't quite name. Behind her, the door creaked open. Caleb stepped out, coffee cup in hand, his hair still damp from washing. He didn't speak at first. He never did in the mornings. He simply stood beside her, looking out at the same horizon. After a moment, he said quietly, "You're up early." "Old habits," she replied with a small smile. "The ranch doesn't wait." He chuckled softly. "No, it doesn't." but it seems to run smoother since you came back." She turned to look at him. "I doubt that." "I don't," he said. "Luke's steadier. The hands work harder. Even the horses seem calmer." Evelyn laughed softly. Maybe they just liked being talked to kindly. Caleb looked at her for a long moment before saying, "Maybe we all do." The words hung between them like a soft wind. Evelyn looked away first, her cheeks warming in the cool air. "I made fresh bread," she said quickly. "Luke's already eaten half of it." Caleb smiled. "That boy could eat a barn if you buttered it." They shared a quiet laugh, and for a while, the morning was just that quiet, easy, familiar. But beneath the stillness, both felt the slow turning of something deeper, something neither dared name aloud. Later that week, Evelyn and Luke rode into Clearwater for supplies. The town was livelier than usual, harvest fair banners strung across the main street, children darting between stalls, music spilling from the saloon. Luke was nearly bursting with excitement. "Miss Evelyn, can I see the horses at the fairground?" She smiled. "Go on, but stay where I can see you." He nodded and ran off, leaving her by the general store. She stepped inside, exchanging greetings with Mrs. Barnes, who had run the shop since before Evelyn's first arrival in the territory. "Well, if it isn't Mrs. Carter," Mrs. Barnes said warmly. "We heard you went back east and whipped some fine folks into shape." Evelyn blushed. "I only did what was needed. That's more than most would have done." "Mrs. Barnes replied, lowering her voice. "Word travels fast out here. Folks are proud of you." Evelyn smiled politely, though pride wasn't quite what she felt. It was relief, simple and clean. She purchased flour, coffee, and new stitching thread before stepping back outside. Across the street, she saw Caleb tying up his horse. She hadn't known he planned to come into town that day, and when he spotted her, his face lit with quiet surprise. "Well, look at that," he said, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect to find you here." "I might say the same," she teased. He dismounted and joined her on the boardwalk. "Needed to trade some cattle notes with Jenkins. Thought I'd see what the fair's about, too." "You," she asked, smiling. "The man who hates crowds can't hide forever." He said, "Besides, Luke's been talking about it all week." As if summoned, the boy came running, breathless. "Mr. Dawson, they've got pie contests and races. You gotta see." Caleb laughed. "Pie contests? Huh, I might stand a chance there." "Not against Miss Evelyn's apple pie," Luke said proudly. "You'd lose before you started." Evelyn laughed, shaking her head. "You two are hopeless." They spent the afternoon wandering the fair. Luke ran from booth to booth, tasting every sweet thing in sight. Caleb and Evelyn followed slower, talking about small things to harvest, the weather, the way autumn made the world feel softer. When evening fell, lanterns were lit across the fairground, casting a warm glow over the gathering. A band played near the square, couples beginning to dance beneath the open sky. Evelyn stood at the edge of the crowd, watching the dancers. Caleb joined her, hands in his pockets. "You used to dance?" he asked quietly. "Once," she said. "A long time ago." He nodded. "You should again." She looked at him, half smiling. "And with who?" "Exactly." He hesitated, then offered his hand. "If you don't mind a partner who's got more boots than rhythm." She laughed softly. "I think I can manage." They stepped onto the dirt square, the music rising around them fiddles, laughter, the scent of wood smoke and cinnamon in the air. At first, they moved cautiously, unsure, both a little shy. But as the song went on, Evelyn's laughter came easier, and Caleb's grip on her hand grew more confident. When the tune slowed, they didn't stop. Their steps found an easy rhythm, as if the music had simply given shape to what had always been there. For a moment, time seemed to stretch two people moving together beneath lantern light, surrounded by noise but utterly alone in their own quiet world. When the song ended, they stood close, breathing hard, faces flushed. Caleb's thumb brushed lightly against her hand before he let go. "Thank you," he said softly, for what she asked, still catching her breath, "for reminding me what it feels like to be alive." Evelyn looked up at him, her eyes warm. "You never forgot. You just needed someone to notice." Their gaze held, unbroken, until Luke's voice cut through the moment. "Miss Evelyn, Mr. Dawson." "They're lighting fireworks." They both laughed, stepping apart just enough to follow the boy toward the crowd. The first rocket shot into the sky, bursting into gold and crimson. The crowd cheered, and Evelyn felt the heat of the light reflected in Caleb's eyes. He glanced down at her, and in that flicker of color and sound, something passed between them, unspoken but certain, as real as the land beneath their feet. Later, as they rode home under a canopy of stars, Luke dozed in the back of the wagon, his head resting on a sack of flour. The world was quiet again, save for the soft creak of wheels and the night wind through the grass. Evelyn looked at Caleb, his profile calm in the starlight. "Tonight was nice," she said softly. He nodded. It was. After a long pause, she added, "It's strange. Sometimes I feel like I've been gone a lifetime, and other times, it's like I never left." Caleb turned to her, his voice low. "Maybe that's because some places never let you go." She smiled faintly. "And some people—" He didn't answer right away. "Some people," he said at last, "are worth holding on to." Evelyn felt her heart steady, full and quiet all at once. She looked ahead, where the dark outline of the ranch rose against the sky, its windows glowing softly with lamplight. Home. And for the first time, she realized it wasn't just a place. It was a person, waiting beside her. The first snow came in silence. It drifted down in soft white sheets, blanketing the fields and turning Willow Creek into a world of silver and stillness. The cattle huddled close to the barn. Smoke curled from the chimney, and the sound of chopping wood echoed faintly from the ridge. Evelyn stood at the window, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the flakes gather on the sill. Winter had always been her quiet season time for mending clothes, baking bread, and reading by lamplight. But this year felt different. There was warmth here now, not just from the fire, but from something unspoken that filled the cabin like sunlight in a winter's gloom. She heard the door open and turned to see Caleb step inside, his coat dusted with snow, his breath fogging in the air. "Cold enough to make a man forget his own name," he muttered, stamping his boots. Evelyn smiled. "Then I'll remind you, Caleb Dawson, stubborn rancher, forever late for supper." He chuckled, setting his gloves by the fire. "Can't argue with that." She poured him tea and handed it over, their fingers brushing briefly. He didn't move his hand right away. "Thank you," he said quietly. The silence between them was soft, companionable. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the world in white. "Luke's in the barn," Evelyn asked. "Finishing up with the calves." Caleb said, "He's got more grit than most grown men." She nodded. "He reminds me of someone." Caleb glanced at her. "That's so, she said, eyes bright. A certain rancher who pretends he doesn't need anyone, but ends up taking care of everyone. He laughed under his breath. You make me sound half better than I am. Maybe you are, she replied softly. Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he set down his cup and looked toward the window. Snow's picking up. We'll be snowed in by morning. Then we'll make the best of it, she said, smiling. I've got stew simmering, bread rising, and a good book waiting. He gave her a small, crooked smile. Sounds like you planned it that way. Maybe I did, she said, her tone teasing, but her eyes steady. That night, the wind howled against the windows, and the fire cast warm light across the cabin walls. Luke had long since gone to bed, leaving Evelyn and Caleb alone at the table, a half-finished game of checkers between them. Caleb leaned back, studying the board. You're about to beat me again. Evelyn grinned. You're distracted. Maybe, he said. Hard to think when someone keeps smiling like that. Her laughter caught in her throat. You're not usually so forward. Maybe winter brings it out of me. She moved her last piece, taking his. Then maybe I should thank the snow. Caleb smiled, but the light in his eyes was softer now. Thoughtful. Evelyn, can I ask you something? Of course. He hesitated, his voice lower. When you were back east, did you ever think you'd come home? She looked at the fire. I didn't. Not at first. I thought going back meant losing myself again. But then I realized home isn't something you find, it's something that waits for you. His voice was barely above a whisper. And you found it here. She met his gaze. Yes, here. The silence that followed was heavy, not with tension, but with meaning. Outside, wind swept across the valley, rattling the shutters, but neither of them moved. Finally, Caleb stood, pacing once before stopping beside the hearth. You should know. When you left, it felt like the ranch went quiet. Luke tried to fill the space. Bless him, but it wasn't the same. I'd wake before dawn and think I heard your voice in the kitchen. Some mornings, I almost believed it. Evelyn's chest tightened. Caleb. He turned toward her, his expression raw and open in a way she'd never seen. I told myself it was foolish to feel that way. But the truth is, I missed you like breath, and I don't reckon I want to do without you again. Her breath caught. The fire cracked, throwing sparks that danced in the air. She stood slowly, her heart pounding. You don't have to. He took a step closer. You sure? Because I'm not a man with much to offer, just this land, this life. It's hard and lonely sometimes. Evelyn smiled, tears welling. Lonely isn't something you've ever made me feel. He exhaled, a quiet, shaky sound. Evelyn Carter, you are the best thing that's ever crossed my path. She reached up, her fingers brushing the side of his face. Then let's stop standing on opposite sides of it. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, two souls who had walked through loss and distance, finally finding their way to the same place. Then, slowly, he leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if testing the air between them. But when she rose onto her toes, closing the space completely, it deepened warm and certain, like the final word to a long unspoken sentence. When they pulled apart, Evelyn's eyes shone. You know, she said quietly, for a man who says little, you have a way of saying everything. He smiled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. Guess winter loosened my tongue. She laughed softly, the sound like music in the quiet cabin. Outside, snow drifted in thick waves, muffling the world until only the faint crackle of the fire and their shared breath filled the air. Caleb drew her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not because I ask you to, because it's where you belong." Evelyn's voice trembled as she answered, "I already decided that the moment I came home." They stood together for a long time, the storm raging around them but never touching the warmth they'd found inside. Later, when they sat by the fire, Caleb's arm draped around her shoulders. Evelyn opened her journal and wrote one final line before closing it. For good. Some winners take everything. Others give it all back. She smiled, feeling the truth of it settle deep in her chest. For years, she had been running from emptiness. Now, at last, she had found peace not in escape, but in belonging. Caleb looked down at her, his eyes soft. "What are you writing?" "Just a reminder," she said, closing the book, "that love, like winter, can be quiet, but it never goes unnoticed." He kissed her temple, whispering, "Then I hope this one lasts." "It will," she said. "It already has." Outside, the snow fell heavier, but inside, the light burned steady and golden, the kind that lasts through any storm. The snow melted slowly that year, turning the world soft and green again. Streams ran high from the thaw. The air smelled of rain and new grass, and the hills shimmered under the returning sun. At Willow Creek, every living thing seemed to stir awake horses prancing in the pasture, the first buds of wildflowers pushing through the soil. Evelyn stood by the fence line one morning, her skirts brushing against the damp grass, watching Luke and Caleb mend a section of rail that had given way under winter's weight. The boys' laughter carried across the field, bright and easy, while Caleb's deeper voice followed steady, patient, full of quiet pride. It struck her then how different this spring felt from all the others. It wasn't just the season that had changed. It was her. For years, she had survived by standing alone. Now, she was learning what it meant to stand with someone, to share burdens and laughter, silence and warmth. When they finished their work, Luke waved. "Miss Evelyn, Caleb says you're planting a garden again this year." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I am, and if you're willing, I'll need a helper." Luke grinned. "I'll help, but only if you let me plant the beans. You said they were lucky. Only if you promise not to eat them all first," she teased. Caleb walked up then, resting his hands on the fence rail. "You know, if you two keep this up, we'll have more beans than cattle before summer." Evelyn looked at him with a soft smile. "Wouldn't be the worst thing." His gaze lingered a moment longer than necessary before he nodded toward the barn. "I'll fetch the tools for you. The soil's ready." As he walked away, she caught herself watching him, the broad set of his shoulders, the easy way he carried himself. There was a steadiness to him, a peace she hadn't realized she'd been craving all her life. The days that followed were full of simple work mending fences, planting rows, fixing roofs that winter had worn thin. Evelyn found joy in the rhythm of it all. She'd wake before dawn, light the stove, and listen for Caleb's boots on the porch. Some mornings he'd bring her wildflowers tucked behind his hatband, pretending it wasn't a gesture at all. "Found these on the ridge," he'd say casually, setting them in a jar by the window. "Just happened to find them," she'd ask with a smile. "Just happened to," he'd reply, eyes warm with mischief. Their laughter filled the cabin in a way that felt as necessary as air. Luke, meanwhile, had grown bolder, more sure of himself, taking on larger chores, teasing Caleb with boyish confidence. "Miss Evelyn says my handwriting's better than yours," he told Caleb one afternoon while sorting feed. Caleb raised a brow. "That's so, yep," Luke said proudly. She said mine looks like a man who means what he writes. Evelyn nearly choked on her tea at that, and Caleb gave a slow grin. "Then I reckon I'd better practice." One evening, after the day's work was done, the three of them sat outside, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky was streaked with pink and gold, and the air was warm with the scent of earth and sage. Luke had fallen asleep in his chair, his head tilted to one side, a book still open in his lap. Evelyn covered him gently with a blanket. Caleb watched her, his expression tender. "He's growing fast." She nodded. "He's got your steadiness?" Caleb smiled faintly. "And your stubbornness?" They both laughed quietly. Then, after a pause, he said, "You've made this place a home. Evelyn?" She looked at him, her heart swelling. "It was always your home." He shook his head. "No, it was just land before you. Now it feels like something." The words settled between them like soft light. Evelyn felt a warmth rise in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and love too deep for words. She turned her gaze back to the horizon. "I used to think I'd spend my life running from judgment, from loneliness, from what I'd lost. But somehow, every road led here." Caleb's voice was quiet. "Sometimes the hardest roads lead to the best places." She smiled, meeting his eyes, "and the best people." His gaze held hers, steady and open. "You think so, I know so." For a moment, neither moved. The only sound was the chirp of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves in the evening breeze. Then Caleb reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. She didn't pull away. "Evelyn," he said softly, "I've been thinking about what comes next." She tilted her head. "Next." He hesitated. "I've never been much with words, but I know I don't want a life that doesn't have you in it. You and Luke, your family now, far as I'm concerned. But I'd like to make it something more official." Her heart gave a single, sharp flutter. "Caleb, I don't have fancy rings or speeches," he said quickly, "but I've got a promise. If you'll have me, I'll spend the rest of my days making sure you never have to face another storm alone." Evelyn's eyes filled before she could stop them. She took his hand in both of hers, her voice trembling but sure. "You already have." "Caleb, every day since I came back." He smiled then, soft and certain, as if her answer had been written in her eyes long before the words came. When he kissed her, the world seemed to fall still around them, the fields, the wind, the setting sun. It wasn't a kiss of urgency, but of understanding, of something that had been growing quietly between them for seasons. When they finally pulled apart, Evelyn whispered, "You didn't have to ask. You know, I did," he said, grinning faintly. "It's what a proper man does." She laughed through her tears. "Then I'm glad you're a proper man." They sat in the fading light, hand in hand, while the sky deepened to twilight. The first stars began to show, and somewhere far off, an owl called into the night. Luke stirred in his chair, mumbling. "Are we going inside soon?" Evelyn said softly, brushing his hair back. Caleb rose and offered her his hand. "Come on, Mrs. Dawson to be. Let's get the boy to bed." She laughed, the sound carrying over the quiet land. "You're sure of yourself already, aren't you?" "Only about you," he said. And as they walked toward the house, their footsteps side by side, the ranch lights flickered on behind them, small and steady against the gathering dark, like the promise of everything still to come. By June, the ranch was alive with color. The hills rolled green and golden beneath the long days, and the sound of hammers and laughter carried across the valley. Caleb and Luke were working on the new addition to the house, a small wing that would open onto the meadow, filled with sunlight and the scent of sage. Evelyn called it the Room of Beginnings. She stood on the porch one afternoon, watching them work. Luke was covered in sawdust, his shirt damp with sweat, while Caleb leaned over a frame of fresh-cut boards, his hat pushed back, humming low to himself. It was a picture she never tired of seeing, their world being built one nail, one heartbeat at a time. "You're going to wear yourself out," she called. Caleb looked up, grinning. "You sound like a wife already." She smiled, shading her eyes. "And you sound too sure of yourself." "Mr. Dawson." "I'm allowed," he said, setting his hammer down. "We've got 2 weeks till the wedding. Feels like I ought to start practicing how to listen to you." Luke laughed from the ladder. "You'd better start now." "Miss Evelyn always wins." "That she does," Caleb said, his voice soft with affection. Evelyn shook her head, trying to hide her blush. "If you both don't get back to work, there'll be no roof for the wedding supper." Caleb chuckled. "Yes, ma'am." He turned back to his work, but his eyes lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. It had become a quiet habit of his watching her, not out of possessiveness, but with the simple awe of a man who still couldn't quite believe she'd chosen to stay. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Evelyn mended her best dress, one she'd brought from Nashville, but never worn there. She let down the hem, trimmed the sleeves, and added a few sprigs of lace she'd saved from her mother's old sewing box. Mrs. Barnes from town brought over baskets of flowers, insisting the ceremony needed a touch of summer's joy. Luke polished the horses' bridles until they gleamed and spent half a day arguing with Caleb over how many guests to invite. "I counted 15 from town," Luke said one evening, ticking off names on his fingers, "and maybe 6 from the neighboring ranches. That's plenty, right?" Caleb smiled. "More than enough. I've never needed a crowd to know what matters." Evelyn glanced up from her stitching. "You'll still let them bring music, won't you?" "Only if you promise to dance," he said. She laughed softly. "You always find a way to make me promise something." He met her gaze with a grin. "Only the good things." As the wedding day approached, the ranch seemed to hum with quiet excitement. Even the animals seemed to sense it, the horses restless, the cattle calm, the meadow bursting into wildflowers as if to celebrate. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and bright. Evelyn woke early, her heart light but full. The house smelled of bread and lavender, and outside, Luke was stringing ribbons between the porch posts. Caleb had gone down to the creek to shave and gather a few wildflowers of his own. When he returned, his hair still damp and his shirt freshly pressed, he stopped at the doorway, watching her from the threshold. She was standing by the mirror, adjusting the lace at her collar. The sunlight poured through the window, soft and golden, and for a moment he simply stood there, struck silent. "You're staring," she said, catching his reflection in the glass. "Can't help it," he replied quietly. "You look like a promise kept." Her smile trembled. "And you look like everything I waited for." Luke burst in then, breathless. "They're here. The folks from Clearwater, and Mrs. Barnes says she brought a fiddle player." Evelyn turned, laughing through sudden tears. "Then I suppose we should go." Caleb offered his arm. "Ready. Mrs. Dawson." "Not yet," she said softly, taking his hand. but I will be soon enough." The ceremony took place under the cottonwood tree by the creek, the same one where Caleb had carved her first wildflower years ago. The branches arched above them like a blessing, and the sound of water filled the air with peace. The preacher from town spoke simply. "Marriage," he said, "isn't built in grand moments. It's built in the quiet ones, in the long days, the shared burdens, the grace of forgiving and being forgiven." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. Caleb squeezed her hand, his thumb brushing gently against her palm. When it came time for vows, she spoke first. "You found me when I'd stopped believing there was a place left for me in this world. You gave me more than love, you gave me peace. I promised to spend the rest of my life making this home as steady and kind as your heart." Caleb's voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "You brought light into a life that had gone quiet. You taught me that love doesn't have to be loud to be strong. I promise to build every tomorrow with you, one sunrise at a time." There was a hush, and then, as if on cue, a soft breeze stirred through the branches. The preacher smiled. "By the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife." Caleb leaned forward, kissed her gently, and the gathered friends broke into warm applause. Luke whooped so loud half the horses spooked. Evelyn laughed, wiping her tears. "You see what you've started?" Caleb grinned. "Wouldn't change it for the world." That evening, they danced in the meadow, lanterns swinging from the tree branches. The fiddle music was sweet and light, and laughter carried far into the dusk. Evelyn danced once with Luke, who tried to lead and nearly tripped over his boots, earning a round of applause from the onlookers. Then Caleb took her hand, pulling her close beneath the stars. "Careful," she said, teasing. "I might get used to this." "That's the idea," he said, smiling. They moved slowly, the music fading into the night around them. The scent of summer wildflowers lingered on the air. When the song ended, Caleb rested his forehead against hers and whispered, "You're my forever." "Evelyn!" She closed her eyes, letting the words sink deep. "And you're mine." The crowd cheered again as fireworks lit the distant sky, faint bursts of color against the dark. But for Evelyn, there was only the sound of his heartbeat and the certainty of this moment. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running from anything. She was home, entirely, completely, beautifully home. The air had begun to turn crisp again, and the hills of Willow Creek shimmered in shades of copper and gold. Evelyn stood by the fence at dusk, watching the last light fade over the valley. The cattle were quiet in the pasture, the smell of cut hay hanging heavy in the cool air. Somewhere behind her, the sound of laughter carried from the barn Caleb and Luke, finishing the day's chores, still teasing each other like father and son. It had been 3 years since the wedding, but sometimes Evelyn still caught herself pausing just to take it all in the peace, the steadiness, the way the ranch seemed to hum with a kind of life she'd never known in her younger years. "Beautiful night," Caleb said as he came up behind her, slipping his arm around her waist. His skin was warm, his clothes smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. She leaned into him with a contented sigh. "They've all been beautiful lately." He kissed her temple. "Maybe we just learned how to notice." They stood in silence for a while, watching the sun sink low. The sky stretched wide and endless, a painter's dream of oranges and purples melting together. Luke appeared a few minutes later, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Chores are done. We got all the cattle in before sundown." Caleb smiled. "Good work, son." Luke still blushed when Caleb said that, though the title had long since become a habit. "Thank you, sir. I was thinking, maybe after supper, we could start on that new fence line you mentioned." Evelyn turned to him, smiling. "You've worked enough for one day. Sit by the fire tonight. Read that book Mrs. Barnes gave you." He grinned sheepishly. "You mean the one about the explorer who gets lost in the desert?" "That's the one," she said. "You could learn something about stubborn men who don't stop even when they should." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Now who does that sound like?" Evelyn laughed. "I wasn't naming names." Luke chuckled and ducked into the house, the screen door creaking behind him. Later, they ate dinner by lamplight stew, warm bread, and the last of the summer preserves. The fire crackled low in the hearth while the wind sighed outside. Luke read aloud from his book, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of the story. Evelyn mended a sleeve while Caleb whittled at a small piece of wood, shaping what looked like a tiny horse. When Luke finished, he set the book down. "Do you ever think," he asked suddenly, "that this place will still be here after we're gone?" Caleb paused, looking up from his carving. "If we've done it right, it will." Evelyn smiled softly. "Land remembers kindness, Luke, and hard work. So do people." He nodded slowly. "I think I understand. It's not about the fences or the cattle, is it? It's about what we leave behind in folks." Caleb's voice was quiet. "That's the heart of it." The boy sat thoughtful for a while before heading to bed, his footsteps light on the stairs. When he was gone, Evelyn turned to Caleb. "He's nearly grown." Caleb nodded, setting the carving on the table. "He's turning into the kind of man I'd hoped he'd be." She touched his hand, because he had the kind of example most boys never get. He looked at her with that slow, humble smile that still made her heart flutter. "You give me too much credit. Not nearly enough," she said softly. That night, after the lamps were out, Evelyn lay awake listening to the wind. It rustled the trees like a lullaby. The same sound she'd fallen asleep to so many nights since she first came to Willow Creek. She turned slightly, feeling Caleb's steady breathing beside her. There was comfort in the constancy of it. Life had given her storms and loss, but it had also given her this peace, belonging, and love that grew deeper instead of fading. In the darkness, she whispered, "Do you ever wonder what we might have been if things had gone differently?" Caleb's voice came low and half asleep. "I used to. Not anymore." "Why not?" He shifted, pulling her closer. "Because I can't imagine anything better than this." Her heart ached in the most beautiful way. "You always know how to quiet my mind." He smiled against her hair. "That's because you've done the same for me since the day you walked into that train station." She chuckled softly. "That feels like a lifetime ago." "It was," he murmured. "A lifetime we built together." She fell asleep to the rhythm of his breathing, knowing that every word was true. The next morning, Evelyn rose early to start breakfast. The kitchen filled with the smell of coffee and biscuits, sunlight spilling across the table. She was stirring a pot of porridge when Luke came in, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Morning," she said warmly. He grinned. "Morning. Miss Dawson." She laughed. "You'll never get used to that." "Will you guess not?" he said, grabbing a cup of coffee. "Caleb says we've got to check the herd up on the North Ridge today. Take extra water," she reminded him, "and that new rope by the tack shed." He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn watched him go, her heart swelling with quiet pride. He was taller now, surer in his step, a young man who had been shaped by care and hard work instead of hardship. Caleb came in soon after, kissing her cheek before grabbing his hat. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said. "Too many thoughts. Good ones. I hope." She smiled faintly. "Mostly." He studied her for a moment. "You've been thinking about the future again, haven't you?" "Just a little," she admitted. "What happens when Luke goes off to start a life of his own? What happens when the years catch up to us?" He set his hands gently on her shoulders. "Then we'll keep doing what we've always done, face it together." She met his eyes, her voice soft. "You make everything sound so simple." "That's because it is," he said. "Love's not supposed to be complicated. It's supposed to keep you steady when the rest of the world isn't." She leaned into him, closing her eyes for a moment. "Then I suppose we're doing it right." "I reckon we are," he whispered. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge, Evelyn sat on the porch with her journal, writing by the fading light. Her words were slow and deliberate, the way they always were when she felt at peace. "The years move faster now. The boy is nearly a man. The man I love grows wiser with every season. The land still breathes, patient and sure, like a promise that keeps renewing itself." She looked up then, watching Caleb and Luke walking back from the fields, their silhouettes framed by the setting sun. They were talking and laughing, the same way they always had. And in that simple, ordinary moment, Evelyn realized that legacy wasn't built from grand acts or wealth. It was built from love, the kind that stayed through winters, bloomed in spring, and carried quietly through every autumn after. She closed her journal and whispered to the wind, "We've built something good." Caleb looked up, caught her gaze across the yard, and smiled. And as the light faded over Willow Creek, Evelyn felt the kind of peace that only comes from a life truly lived. The morning light spread slow and golden across the valley, touching every blade of grass, every hill and hollow of Willow Creek. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended between seasons not quite spring, not yet summer, a moment of quiet perfection. Evelyn stood on the porch, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, watching the sun climb. From the barn came the low murmur of voices. Caleb's deep and calm, Luke's younger but steady now, full of the quiet confidence of a man who'd learned from the land itself. It was Luke's last morning on the ranch before heading south to start his own place near the edge of the Wyoming line. His decision had been made months ago, and though Evelyn had known this day would come, her heart ached all the same. The door creaked open behind her. Caleb stepped out, his shirt sleeves rolled, his hair silvering at the temples. He handed her a biscuit and leaned on the railing beside her. "You've been up since dawn," he said softly. "I wanted to watch the sun come up one more time with him, still here." Caleb nodded. "He'll be fine. Evelyn, you raised him right." She smiled faintly. "We raised him right." They stood in silence, side by side, the smell of hay and coffee in the air, down by the corral. Luke was loading the last of his supplies onto the wagon. His horse snorted, impatient but well-trained. Evelyn's eyes lingered on the boy. No, not a boy anymore. His shoulders were broad now, his movements sure. The hat he wore had once been Caleb's, and the smile he carried had once been hers. "Seems like yesterday," she murmured. "He was just a scared boy showing up here with nothing but a satchel and too much pride." Caleb smiled. "And you fed him stew and gave him purpose. No wonder he stayed." Evelyn turned to him. "Do you think he'll miss us every sunrise?" Caleb said quietly. "But that's how you know you did right by him. A good home gives you roots and the courage to grow wings." When Luke finally came up to the porch, his boots dusty from the trail, He tried to hide the emotion behind his grin. "You two gonna make me late if you keep staring at me like that." Evelyn laughed, though her voice trembled. "Then we'll keep you here forever." He hugged her tightly, his arms strong, his chin resting atop her hair. "You taught me everything that matters, Miss Evelyn." She looked up at him, tears bright in her eyes. "Then don't forget it when the world gets hard. You listen to your heart, not just the noise around you." He nodded. "I will." Caleb clasped his hand next, firm and proud. "You know you can always ride back this way." "I know," Luke said, "but I figure I'll just make you come visit me for once." Caleb chuckled. "Don't tempt me. I might just stay and eat you out of house and home." Luke laughed, then turned back to Evelyn, his voice soft. "You're the reason I know what family feels like." She cupped his cheek. "Then you go and make one of your own." "That's all the thanks I need." He climbed into the wagon, flicked the reins, and the wheels began to creak over the dirt road. Evelyn stood watching until he disappeared over the hill, a small cloud of dust marking his path. For a long while, neither she nor Caleb spoke. Then she said quietly, "He'll do fine. He will." Caleb agreed. "You gave him your courage." She smiled. "And your patience." He looked at her, eyes warm. "That's a good mix." The days that followed moved with the slow rhythm of peace. The ranch still hummed with life, new calves in the fields, wildflowers blooming along the creek, the steady work of tending fences and repairing the barn roof. But it was quieter now, in a way that felt both strange and sacred. Sometimes, Evelyn would find herself listening for Luke's laughter or the thud of his boots on the porch, only to remember he was gone. Yet even in that absence, there was comfort. Love, she realized, didn't leave with distance. It simply stretched to fill the space between hearts. One afternoon, she found Caleb sitting under the cottonwood tree, the same one where they'd spoken their vows 7 years before. He was carving again, a small wooden figure taking shape in his calloused hands. She sat beside him, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What are you making this time?" He smiled faintly. "A hawk. Thought Luke might like one to hang by his window. Something to remind him where the sky starts." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You always think of everything." He chuckled. "Just trying to keep up with you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the creek. The sound of it was timeless, the same song it had sung when she'd first arrived all those years ago, scared and searching. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "about how much has changed since that day Caleb nodded?" "Every morning, but some things haven't changed. The land's still here, the sky's still endless, and you're still the best part of all of it." Evelyn smiled through a sudden rush of tears. "I used to think I came here by accident." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You came here because this is where you were meant to be." That evening, they walked the ridge together as the sun dipped low. The world below them glowed with color copper fields, amber light, and the faint shimmer of the creek winding through it all. Evelyn slipped her hand into his. "Do you ever get tired of it?" Caleb looked out at the horizon. "Never. Every day it's different, but it always feels the same. Like coming home." She leaned against him, her heart full. "Home," she echoed. As the stars began to appear, they turned back toward the house, their footsteps slow and easy. The lamps inside glowed faintly through the windows, and the smoke from the chimney rose into the deepening dusk. At the porch, Evelyn paused, looking up at the wide sky. "You think he's looking at the same sunset right now?" Caleb smiled. I'd bet on it. Then I hope he knows we're proud. He knows, Caleb said simply. He's got a piece of this place in him. Always will. They stood there until night fully fell, the world around them wrapped in the soft hum of crickets and wind. Evelyn reached for his hand again, her voice gentle. You remember what you told me once, that love isn't loud, it's steady. Caleb nodded. I remember. She looked at him, eyes bright in the starlight. You were right. He squeezed her hand. That's the only kind that lasts. They stood there beneath the endless sky, the land stretching out before them like a living memory, the story of two hearts that had weathered storms, built a home, raised a son, and found in each other the peace they'd spent a lifetime seeking. And as the night deepened over Willow Creek, Evelyn whispered softly, Some stories never really end, do they? Caleb smiled, pulling her close. No, he said, they just keep on living. Right here. He placed a hand over her heart, where it beat steady and sure, the same rhythm as the land, the wind, and the stars above. And together, under the vast and endless sky, they watched the lights of home flicker warm and eternal. The family sent the widowed woman as a punishment, but she was the treasure he had dreamed of is more than a frontier love story. It's a quiet reminder that sometimes what feels like loss is the very path to grace. Evelyn, once rejected and forgotten, never let her pain turn to bitterness. She chose kindness over resentment, compassion over anger, and in doing so, she helped Caleb, a man who had accepted loneliness as his fate, rediscover the beauty of love, trust, and home. Their story teaches us that love isn't about perfection or passion that burns too bright. It's about understanding, patience, and the peace of knowing someone sees you, truly sees you, and stays. If you've ever felt unseen, unappreciated, or cast aside, let this story remind you there is always someone out there who will recognize the quiet strength within you, just as Caleb did with Evelyn. Love, at its truest, isn't loud. It's steady. It builds rather than destroys. It heals rather than wounds. Thank you, dear listener, for joining us on this journey across the wild frontier of hearts. If this story touched you, if it stirred something gentle and hopeful inside, please like, share, and subscribe to Frontier Hearts for more tales of love, courage, and redemption beneath the boundless western sky.